Class C addresses start with binary 110. So once again, this is not 110 in decimal, but 110 in binary. The 0 in this case is in the third bit position in the first octet. So Class A had 0 in the first bit position, Class B in the second, and now Class C has the 0 in the third bit position. Going through the combinations in the first octet will give us a range of 192 to 223. So this is the range of Class C addresses. In Class C addresses, the first 24 bits is network. The last 8 bits is host. So for an address of 192.168.1.1, we know that this is a Class C address because the first octet is in the range 192 to 223. So we have a Class C address, which means that the first 24 bits is network, and the last 8 bits or octet is the host portion of the address. So in other words, just by looking at an address, you'll now be able to determine if it's Class A, Class B, and Class C based on the ranges we've now discussed. You'll also be able to know which portion is network and which portion is host. But be careful, as mentioned, these classes have been superseded by CIDR or CIDR. Now, Class D addresses are different to Class A, B, and C. Class A, B, and C are used for unicast traffic. Class D addresses are used for multicast traffic. Now, with multicast addresses, in the first octet, the 0 is in the fourth bit position. So in these addresses, the first 3 binary bits are set to 1, followed by a binary 0. Going through all the combinations, the range is from 224 to 239 in the first octet. So this is the range of multicast addresses in IP version 4. So as an example, address 239.1.1.1 is a private multicast address which could be used internally within your organization. Other examples of multicast addresses include well-known multicast addresses for routing protocols such as OSPF. The OSPF routing protocol uses multicasts 224.0.0.5 and 224.0.0.6. These multicasts in the 224 range are known as link local multicasts, as these multicasts do not propagate off the local link or local segment. And multicasts in this range are often used by routing protocols such as OSPF, RIP, and others. A multicast implies once again that one device is talking to a group of devices rather than one-to-one communication. Class E addresses are reserved addresses. They start with 4 binary ones and are on the range 240.0.0.0 all the way to 255, 255, 255, 255, which is a reserved address for broadcasts. We'll talk about broadcasts in a moment, but once again, the important piece to understand here is that Class E addresses are on the range 240 to 255 in the first octet. Class E addresses are reserved addresses for both testing and other purposes. So, a Class A address uses the first 8 bits as the network portion. So in a pure Class A address, the first 8 bits are network. So in this example, we've got network 10.0.0.0, so that's the network address, and we have an IP address of 10.1.2.3, which is the address configured on a host. So this is the host portion of the address, and this is the network portion of the address. Class A networks are once again in the range 1 to 126 in the first octet. So if a router, such as the one in this picture, receives traffic going to an IP address of 10.1.1.1, the router would know that the host is on network 10 because this is a Class A network. So in this case, it would route the traffic to the left-hand side. In the same way, if it receives traffic going to an address of 12.1.1.1, it knows that the host is on network 12, and it would therefore route the traffic to the right-hand side. This is the reason why 2 hosts can have the same host portion, So in this example, the host portion is 1.1.1 because they're on different networks. The network portion is different. The router can use the classful network, in other words, the first octet consisting of 10 or 12, to differentiate between multiple networks. So in this case, it's routing on the first 8 bits of the address. With Class B networks, the first 8 bits denotes the network portion of the address. So in this example, 172.16 is the network portion. So this is the network address, and a host may have an address such as 172.16.1.2, so 1.2 is the host portion of the address. Class B networks are in the range 128 to 191 in the first octet. So in the same way as the previous example, a router can route traffic to an address of 172.16.1.1 because it knows that the network is 172.16 and it can therefore route the traffic to the left-hand side. Traffic going to host 172.17.1.1 is routed to the right-hand side because the network portion is 172.17, whereas this host with IP address 172.16.1.1 has a network portion of 172.16. Routers can route correctly once again, even though the host portion is the same. In other words, in this example, it's 1.1, but in this case, the network portion is different, so routing takes place correctly. The router knows that these two hosts are on separate networks because the network portion is different. And in Class C addresses, 192.168.1.0 would be a network address. A host address would be something like 192.168.1.1. Class C addresses are in the range 192 to 223 in the first octet. So once again, there are two devices in this example, and they have the same host portion, in other words, .1. But the network portion of these two host addresses is different. On the left-hand side, we have 192.168.1, and on the right-hand side, we have 192.168.2. In Class C addresses, the first 24 bits, or the first 3 octets of an address denotes network, and the last octet, or last 8 bits, denotes host portion in a Class C network.